Impact Wrestling and AEW. It's all anyone can talk about after Wednesday's edition of the Winter is Coming Dynamite. It's all anyone can talk about is the working relationship that is now in place between Impact Wrestling and AEW. So what does this mean going forward? Well, we don't know a lot, obviously, at the moment. All that we do know is that the new AEW World Champion, Kenny Omega, is going to be appearing on Impact Wrestling on Access TV this week. Now, I've done a couple of videos so far breaking down the working relationship that's apparently in place now between Impact Wrestling and AEW. What does that mean from a business perspective, a talent perspective, a fan perspective? What can we expect? As far as Kenny Omega on Impact next week, we've done a video on that as well, breaking down the storyline point of view, what it means with Kenny Omega and Don Callis. Have they stolen the AEW World Championship? Is Don Callis going to be Kenny Omega's manager anymore? Is Kenny Omega going to be appearing on Impact Wrestling all the time? There is so much to get into, and we've already really just got into at the moment. It's the tip of the iceberg. There is so much to get into when it comes to Impact Wrestling and AEW. What does it mean in the future, especially going forward for this working relationship? What does it mean when it comes to other working relationships that AEW has when it comes to the NWA, AAA, possibly New Japan, etc.? What does that all mean? What people have been talking about a lot though, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video, is the Impact and AEW matchups that we could see because of this working relationship. Now, I've seen some discussion that there aren't many dream matches in place when you look at the Impact and AEW roster, and that depends on what your definition of a dream match is. Nevertheless, I've had a bit of a think of what would an AEW versus Impact Wrestling event look like? What would the matchups look like? What matches, more importantly, do we want to see, do the fans want to see, if it was indeed Impact Wrestling versus AEW in an actual event, a pay-per-view or a TV special or something like that? What matches would we want to see, and what matches could we be likely to see if such an event were to take place? So I've had a bit of a look. We're going to have to delve into the world of fantasy slightly and fantasy booking with this one. So bear with me, and most importantly, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Which Impact Wrestling versus AEW matches do you want to see in the future going forward, either on AEW Dynamite or Impact Wrestling on Access TV, or at a special event, whether that's a pay-per-view or a TV special? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like. Let's get into the matches though. Specifically the first match, you got to have World Champion versus World Champion. At the moment, as things stand, it's currently Rich Swann of Impact Wrestling, the Impact World Champion, and Kenny Omega, of course, as I mentioned previously, the AEW World Champion. So you would have champion versus champion. Now, is this a dream match? No, it's not a dream match. There has been a lot of discussion ever since Rich Swann won the Impact World Championship, even prior to winning the World Championship. Is Rich Swann a worthy World Champion? Is Rich Swann a World Champion figure? Is Rich Swann a World Champion caliber wrestler? To me, that is a question that is yet to be answered, if I'm going to be brutally honest. Rich Swann has only just won the World Championship. He won the World Championship at Bound for Glory against Eric Young. I thought the match was good. Most importantly, when it comes to Rich Swann, though, and his World Championship reign, if you'd have asked me before feuding with Eric Young, could Rich Swann be World Champion? I'd have said no. I'd have said that his ceiling probably is the X Division or a mid-card title if Impact Wrestling decides to introduce that at some point. However, the feud when it comes to Eric Young happened. The feud between Rich Swann and Eric Young happened, and it was fantastic. It was brilliant. It was the best thing going in Impact Wrestling over the summer. Ever since it kicked off at Slammiversary, it was the best thing that happened, whether it was Eric Young's return at Slammiversary and attacking Rich Swann, and then the retirement angle where Rich Swann retired, Eric Young then winning the World Championship, Rich Swann returning, all of that stuff was absolutely brilliant, and he developed a lot. He being Rich Swann, he developed a hell of a lot, and he stepped up to another level in that feud. He showed that he can talk, which I think was an issue, a point of contention in the past. Can Rich Swann cut a promo? Can he talk people into the arena and put the behinds in seats, as it were, on the microphone? Look at his retirement speech and his retirement angle. He convinced fans. Now, everyone knew he wasn't retiring at the time, of course. Nevertheless, he cut a fantastic promo, and I think some people said, okay, maybe he can talk then. Obviously, there's going to be questions. He's not big enough. He's too short. My response to that is it's 2020. I don't think at this point there is a certain size of a wrestler that is going to be a world champion or anything like that. Rey Mysterio and the likes of Eddie Guerrero, etc., all of those years ago have proven that that is just BS, that is non-existent. If you're good enough, you can be the world champion. So I think the jury's still out when it comes to Rich Swann. Is he good enough to be a world champion? In terms of a match with Kenny Omega, can Rich Swann keep up with Kenny Omega? I'm sure he can. I'm sure he can when it comes to having a fantastic match. Rich Swann versus Kenny Omega would be a fantastic match. I don't know if Rich Swann is the best person to be in this role for a champion versus champion match between two promotions that we didn't think were previously going to work together, though. That would be my issue there. I would look at the Impact roster and I would say, is Rich Swann really the best person to be in this role, in a high-profile match, champion versus champion, the Impact World Champion versus the AEW World Champion? Is Rich Swann the best person for that position? Right now, I would say no. However, the issue then becomes who would replace Rich Swann in a match like this. That is the issue right now with the Impact Wrestling roster. I've said this a couple of times in numerous videos now, that I think Impact really does lack that top tier, top of the card babyface that they can build the whole company around. There just isn't one at the moment. That's why we've got the likes of Rich Swann as world champion. That's why we had Eddie Edwards as world champion, because there isn't that top of the card. He's the guy. He's the one we build the entire promotion around babyface. They just don't have that. They don't have the John Cena top of the card babyface. They just don't have it. And I'm not saying John Cena's going to be an Impact or anything like that. My point being is they don't have that guy. They don't have the top guy. Therefore, Rich Swann is your option at the moment to face Kenny Omega. It would be a massive shot. It'd be a huge shot in the arm for Rich Swann's career. It'd be a massive opportunity, the biggest opportunity of his career, if he main evented an event or a pay-per-view representing Impact Wrestling to face off against Kenny Omega. I don't think Rich Swann would win. I think Kenny Omega would have to win that match just by the star that he is, and it's AEW. They are the de facto bigger promotion here. So it'd be an interesting match. I think almost the most interesting part of it, though, would be who would be the Impact World Champion going into that? Who is the guy that can represent the company? I said yesterday when I talked about the Impact AEW relationship, specifically the Kenny Omega coming to Impact Wrestling storyline, I said if AEW and Impact really wanted to make a statement when it comes to this whole storyline, you'd put the Impact World Championship on Kenny Omega. And I know people might say to that, well, Rich Swann, he only just won the World Championship, he only just won it at Bound for Glory. But my response to that would be there have been quite a few short title reigns in Impact Wrestling this year. They're not afraid to change the title if that's what business requires at the time. Eddie Edwards had a very short title reign before he lost it to Eric Young. Eric Young had a very short title reign before he lost it to Rich Swann. We saw the North and Su Yung win the championships of their respective divisions at Bound for Glory and then lose it a couple of weeks later at Turning Point. Impact aren't afraid to switch titles if business needs it. If Impact really wanted to get involved with this whole storyline with AEW, Kenny Omega and Don Callis, they would have Kenny Omega win the Impact World Championship and have Kenny Omega carry it around every time, not only when he's on Impact, of course, but when he's on Dynamite. When he's in front of that bigger audience, you've always got that constant reminder of Impact Wrestling. You've got that constant reminder of the Impact World Championship. Where do you find Kenny Omega defending that Impact Championship? You find him defending it on Tuesday nights on Access TV. So, I mean, would you make it for the title? I don't know. This is all hypothetical at this point, isn't it? Nevertheless, it would be a massive opportunity for Rich Swann, but I'd have Kenny Omega winning, and I'd make it for both titles, and I'd have Kenny Omega win that title as well. I think a fascinating part of it as well would be that you have Don Callis in the corner of Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champion. In the corner of the AEW World Champion, you have the Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President. I think, again, that is a fascinating dynamic and concept. I'll start off right at the beginning there. Is it a dream match? Absolutely not. Is it a fascinating match and an interesting match? Absolutely. Just the concept of having two world champions of rival companies that are working together now, I think is a fascinating concept and something that I'd be very interested in seeing. I think it'd be very, very interesting to see this different dynamic of these two world champions face off. But other matches that we could possibly see if we had an Impact versus AEW event, or we have these interpromotional matches in the future, is champion versus champion again, but there's a bit more to it this time. It's the tag team champions. It is the Good Brothers facing off against the Young Bucks, the former Bullet Club members facing off against each other. And this one writes itself, doesn't it? There is so much history there when it comes to the Young Bucks and the Good Brothers. There is so much history because obviously they were in New Japan together. They are so associated with the Bullet Club and the Elite and being in New Japan that the story really there writes itself. And obviously, if you want to look into the politics of it all as well, the politics of it all are there as well, because the story's been told, but we'll tell it again here. When AEW was the upstart company and they were planning for their Dynamite debut last October, around that time in the summer, or in the spring and the summer, of course, Luke Gallows, Carl Anderson and AJ Styles, all of their contracts were coming up with WWE. And AEW, specifically the Young Bucks, reached out to Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows and said, look, you don't want to be in WWE. You want to come with us to AEW. We're doing this whole thing on TNT. We've got this big new company. We're going to change the world. We're going to change the face of pro wrestling. You want to be back with your friends from New Japan. You want to be back where you can be the Good Brothers. You're not going to be this member of the OC in WWE on Monday Night Raw with AJ Styles. You're going to be who you really are, and you're going to be with your friends. You're going to have creative freedom. They got given contract offers by AEW, decent contract offers, significant contract offers, more money than they'd made previously, along with AJ Styles. But what happened? WWE caught wind of this. During that period of time, the Good Brothers and AJ Styles, they were traveling Japan. WWE was on a live event tour of Japan at the time. Triple H, the COO, or I think at the time he was still involved in talent relations and talent contracts. I'm not sure if he is right now. He was with them at the time and he said, look, I know you've had offers from people from AEW. I know you've got friends over there in AEW like the Young Bucks, but you're factored in here. You are in here. We want you to stay. We have big plans for you in WWE. The Good Brothers as well, and AJ Styles, of course, they had talks with Paul Heyman at the time, who was executive director of Raw. He told him, look, you are factored in. You are going to be so involved in and critical to the success of Monday Night Raw under the reign of Paul Heyman. And Triple H said, look, we need you here. You're so important. You're vital. So they gave the Good Brothers and AJ Styles a contract offer they just couldn't refuse. So the Good Brothers, Luke Gallows, Carl Anderson, AJ Styles, they took the money and they re-signed with WWE. Now, what's important there? Well, the reason that the Young Bucks wanted to have Gallows and Anderson and AJ Styles come into the company, because the plans were, on the first episode of Dynamite, you remember that? All the way back to October last year, the first episode of Dynamite, what did we actually see? We saw the formation of the Inner Circle on the first episode of Dynamite that year. What we were meant to see, if Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows and AJ Styles had signed with AEW, what we were going to see, Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows debut in All Elite Wrestling, and they were going to look like partner up with the Young Bucks and then viciously attack the Young Bucks and have two sides of Bullet Club facing off against each other and feuding. This would have eventually led to AJ Styles debuting in AEW if he signed with AEW, and siding with the Good Brothers, and once again facing off against the Elite, against the Bucks and Kenny Omega, and having sort of a past version of the Bullet Club face off against a newer version of the Bullet Club, and have Omega and the Elite face off against Anderson, Gallows and AJ Styles. That was the plan. Of course, we know now it didn't happen. It didn't happen because Anderson, Gallows and AJ Styles re-signed with WWE. But of course, now, fast forward to 2020, the pandemic happens, WrestleMania happens, and what happens in the end? Because of WWE, essentially, because of WWE's insistence on, I don't know, the lies, if you were to believe Anderson and Gallows, if you were going to believe the lies, apparently, of Paul Heyman to AJ Styles of Anderson and Gallows, regardless, they are now no longer with the WWE. They are now with Impact Wrestling, and they are currently the Impact World Tag Team Champions. So there is so much story to be told there, isn't there? Not only is the past in New Japan, but also they can kind of play on, the Bucks can say, well, you turned us down before, and then Gallows and Anderson can say, well, you abandoned us, and there can be this real heated and personal rivalry of Gallows and Anderson seeing the Bucks have this success in this upstart company, choosing the offer to stay with the bitter enemy known as WWE, and ultimately it failed. They can do all that kind of stuff. And on top of that, I mean, the basics, when you come down to any wrestling match, the basics are, how good is it going to be in the ring? That is the fundamental basics of it all, is how good is it going to be in the ring? And I think when it comes to that, it would be brilliant. It would be brilliant. Of course, it'd be fantastic in the ring. Why wouldn't it be fantastic in the ring? These are two top-tier, fantastic tag teams. Why wouldn't it be fantastic in the ring? It would be awesome in the ring, absolutely. So what other match could we potentially be looking at in this dream scenario, or maybe not a dream scenario, maybe a future scenario of Impact Wrestling versus AEW? Well, potentially, what about Sami Callihan versus Jon Moxley? Now, this is a match that I've seen quite a few people say they do want to see. And again, when it comes to the Young Bucks and the Good Brothers, there is story here. There is so much story here because if you're not familiar with the past of Sami Callihan and Jon Moxley, they have a past on the independent scene, specifically in CZW. They were known as the Switchblade Conspiracy in CZW. Had a lot of, if you're not familiar with CZW, Combat Zone Wrestling, they're best known for their death matches, essentially. If you, a funny side point here, when it comes to Jon Moxley, if you see his back close up, his back is all messed up from those years of death matches. It has cuts, scars, scar tissue. It is brutal. Nevertheless, that comes from their time in Combat Zone Wrestling in CZW. Now, when this announcement was made, or the shocking revelation was made, rather, on Wednesday about the potential partnership and working relationship between Impact Wrestling and AEW, one of the first people to comment was Sami Callihan. He posted a gif of a switchblade, and a lot of people went, Switchblade Conspiracy, Sami Callihan and Jon Moxley. Well, Sami Callihan's gone even further than that and has literally atted Jon Moxley on Twitter saying he wants to reunite and reacquaint himself with his former friend and tag team partner. So again, this one writes itself. This one writes itself. There's history there. Think of the promos. These are two absolutely fantastic promo guys in Sami Callihan and Jon Moxley. They absolutely can sell an audience on a microphone. And Jon Moxley's not afraid. Since he's left WWE, he's actually done it quite a bit because he hasn't been able to do it for years in WWE. He loves a death match, and AEW loves a death match. Impact Wrestling isn't opposed to having these kind of death matches as well. I think the best thing about any pro wrestling card, the best pro wrestling cards and pay-per-views in history always have variety. And this is a match that would certainly have variety, because if you had a form of a death match, I don't know what you would call it, whether you would call it a unsanctioned match or a lights out match or whatever you want to call it, no holds barred, or just a death match, whatever you want to call it, have anything goes, weapons, violence, blood, all that kind of stuff. Sami Callihan and Jon Moxley would beat the hell out of each other. And the audience watching at home, or if we're even in arenas by that point, would absolutely eat it up. This would be brutal, this would be violent, this would be compelling and quality content, more importantly. And this is, again, if you want to talk about dream matches, and I know there's been a lot of talk about, oh, is it a dream match? Does Impact and AEW have any dream matches? Is this legitimately a dream match? Again, it depends on your definition of what a dream match is. Some people look at it as, and I kind of subscribe to this theory of matches that are impossible to happen. It just can't happen, whether it's because they're in different times and generations, all that kind of stuff. Or some people look at it as a dream match that we never thought could happen, but it will happen. I kind of subscribe to the former rather than the latter. I don't know if any of these matches are necessarily dream matches. In terms of if you want to subscribe to the latter of a match we didn't think was going to happen, this would be a dream match, I suppose, in your point of view, that it's a match we didn't think was going to happen. They were in separate companies. They never felt like we were going to see them in the same company ever. They're two very similar guys. They've got a ton of history. They were tag team partners. This one writes itself, and this one could be absolutely fantastic. I think out of all of these on the card, there's only maybe one match more that I would be really excited to see maybe over this one. This would be the Impact versus AEW match that I would really want to see. Jon Moxley, Sami Callihan. It could be really, really special if it does happen, if this pay-per-view does happen. It's certainly something that I would be really looking forward to seeing. Now, another match we could see, you have to have it on the show, you'd have both women's champions face off. And I mentioned we saw the world champion from the men face off, we saw the tag team champions from both Impact and AEW face off. You'd have to have the females face off on the show. And this would be fascinating to me, because the contrast between the Impact Wrestling knockouts and the AEW women's division is so stark, it's absolutely insane. Now, I've seen a lot of people talking about, this has been another point of discussion, what does Impact offer AEW? What does AEW get out of this relationship? But I think that argument's actually quite wrong. I've seen a lot of people say that they don't think that AEW gets anything out of this. AEW does get quite a lot out of this. Most importantly, they get buzz. They get buzz. What has everyone been talking about the last couple of days? AEW and Impact Wrestling. And I understand that people might say, well, Impact benefits even more greatly there because they get even more buzz than they were getting before. But AEW is getting buzz regardless. That's why they've done the deal. On top of that, they do get talent. They do get talent. Does AEW have better talent to offer Impact? Yes. I've seen some people say, but it means that Impact can actually offer some of their knockouts to AEW. That would help AEW's women's division. It would to a point. It would to a point. This is my sort of issue, and if you're even slightly familiar with the channel, you know this is my issue when it comes to AEW and their women's division, is that at this point, I think earlier on when with the women's division, and there's still issues to this day with the women's division in AEW, initially you could have made the argument of it's a talent problem. They just don't have the right talent there. They don't have high enough quality talent in the AEW women's division. They just need better talent. When better talent becomes available, when contracts expires with various companies, the women's division will improve. And that's not to say that it hasn't improved, because it has. From day one to now, the women's division in AEW has improved. But the biggest issue when it comes to the AEW women's division isn't talent really for me. It's the booking philosophy of the AEW women's division. This is why the contrast between Impact and AEW is so stark, especially when it comes to women's wrestling, because Impact books women's wrestling correctly. And by that is they book it equally. They make it a cornerstone of the show, and it's one of the most important aspects of the show. When you watch an episode of Impact Wrestling, you'll see multiple women's matches, not just one 5 minutes before the main event that only lasts a couple of minutes. You see multiple women's storylines. And also, most importantly, you see women main eventing the show on regular occasions. You see them main eventing shows, you see them main eventing pay-per-views, you see them main eventing TV specials. You can't say anything like that for AEW when it comes to the women's division. You just can't. That is the ultimate problem with the AEW women's division. It's token at best, and it shouldn't be. You have one women's match per show. That match is usually the match before the main event match or segment. It usually lasts about 5 minutes, and a lot of the time it's not really that competitive. It might just be a squash match or whatever. You have one storyline per any period of time, one major storyline per any period of time in AEW. When it comes to the females, that's it. You have Cody Rhodes, an executive vice president, when he's on a media call for Full Gear, when you have people openly criticizing, why don't we have an actual story for the Nyla Rose versus Hikaru Shida AEW World Women's Championship match for Full Gear? Why don't we have a story there? You have the response of an executive vice president like Cody Rhodes, just says, oh, it doesn't need to be a story for everything. It doesn't need to be, people picking on each other and having a story. Why can't you have just two wrestlers face off and be happy with that? That is such BS, because if that is the motto you want to live by, if that is the motto that you subscribe to when it comes to booking of pro wrestling, why don't you do that with your stories? He doesn't. He always has a story. He always has a storyline. He always has an angle in his matches. Why? Because that's what sells tickets. That's what makes ratings. That's what gets people to tune into the show. So that idea that women's wrestling doesn't need an angle or storyline is such BS. It's just pure laziness. And that's the problem with the AEW women's division. I don't think having talent like DEONNA PURRAZZO, like Taya Valkyrie, like Rosemary, like Tenille Dashwood, like anyone from Impact Wrestling come over to AEW, it wouldn't fix the women's problem there, because the problem is when it comes to women's wrestling in AEW is that the booking philosophy is just wrong. It's just wrong, and we're nearly 18 months into Dynamite on TNT, and it still isn't at the level that it should be, or it certainly isn't at the level of everything else on Dynamite. Why? Because the booking philosophy is wrong. It's obvious they don't know how to book women's wrestling. That could be one of the biggest things from this AEW Impact relationship, is Impact could actually tell them, this is how you book women's wrestling. You have them in multiple matches, multiple storylines, make them a cornerstone of the show, put them in the main event, give them an opportunity to thrive. This is why the AEW women's division hasn't thrived, because there hasn't been an opportunity to. That's the biggest problem. How can you say something doesn't work when you don't give it the opportunity to succeed? That is the biggest issue when it comes to the AEW women's division and comparison to the Impact Knockouts division. The Impact Knockouts division is one of, if not the best women's division in the world right now. Why? Because they invest time into it. Not just money, they invest time. That is the most crucial thing. Invest time into it. Multiple matches, multiple storylines, multiple angles. Put them in the main event. Look at WWE. They do the exact same thing there. They invest time into it. And that's what AEW doesn't do. And I understand the argument of that of AEW as well. We've only got 2 hours per week on TNT. Again, you kind of do, but you kind of don't. You've got AEW Dark. And yes, if you do have 2 hours on TNT, you fit the woman in. well, we've only got 2 hours, so the women don't matter. That's what they're kind of saying there. That is the problem. So if they had this match, going back on topic, rant over, if they had this match on AEW versus Impact pay-per-view, look, Hikaru Shida, I'm a massive fan on. I think she has carried that women's division along with Britt Baker in terms of her character. But Hikaru Shida in the ring has carried that division. She has had some spectacular matches. She's done the best with what she's been given, especially sometimes the real poor booking of that division. So I have no doubt DEONNA PURRAZZO versus Hikaru Shida would be a hell of a match. And maybe it would be a point of actually showing how great the women's division can be in AEW by having a fantastic match here. But it's just the issue when it comes to women's wrestling in AEW just makes my blood boil because it's so poorly booked. It is so poorly booked, and it, most importantly, could be so much better. Now, speaking of dream matches, this could be a dream match, I think. This is a match when it comes to Impact and AEW that I think everyone wants to see, and that's the North versus FTR. And the North have spoken about wanting to face FTR for a long time. Most importantly, FTR have made a ton of noises about wanting to face off against the North. When have they been doing that? Well, even when they were back in WWE and known as the Revival, FTR were very, very vocal about wanting to face the North. Now, once they got their release by WWE, they went on Chris Jericho's podcast, and when Jericho said, you know, what's your future, what's your plans, this is before they'd even signed with AEW, as far as we're aware. They were very open. The first team they said they wanted to face off with is the North. Why? Because the North is one of the best tag teams in the world right now. They absolutely are. They're the longest reigning Impact World Tag Team Champions in the history of the promotion. They're 2-time World Tag Team Champions. They have done everything when it comes to tag team wrestling in Impact Wrestling. When it comes to tag team wrestling in Impact right now, they are the gold standard. I know the Good Brothers are the World Tag Team Champions, and obviously there is a point of uncertainty right now when it comes to the future of Ethan Page. We don't know if he's going to re-sign with Impact. Heck, he might even sign with AEW and then he's an AEW guy. As far as we know, if this relationship is ongoing for a while, this could be potentially how Ethan Page stays in Impact Wrestling, possibly, because Ethan Page's contract does expire at the end of the year. There have been rumors that he could be headed to AEW or WWE. Most importantly in that situation is Josh Alexander isn't going anywhere. Josh Alexander signed a new 3-year contract in 2019. He's with Impact Wrestling until 2022, so he isn't going anywhere. So if Ethan Page does leave Impact, the North are breaking up. They're done. So if Ethan Page, for whatever reason, did sign with AEW, then we could still have the FTR versus North match, the dream match, that potentially could happen. Now, this match, I mean, I have no doubt it would be fantastic. There's been some criticism, which has been quite surprising, of FTR recently, of people saying that they're overhyped. The people, I think, that say that FTR are overhyped just don't understand fundamentally tag team wrestling or pro wrestling in general. The issue with that is that modern pro wrestling is so different to pro wrestling of 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It is miles different. AEW is a problem for that. I will not disagree with that. I think the thing is that there are so many different genres of pro wrestling now, and AEW has kind of lent into this, and they've kind of pulled back a little bit because they were getting criticism for it. There is certainly a place for this modern pro wrestling of lots of different high spots, more of a choreographed match and choreographed stunt show, as it were. I know that will upset some people, but more matches with choreographed flips and all this kind of stuff. There is a place for that in pro wrestling because that is the evolution of pro wrestling. There is also certainly a place for old school psychology, mat-based pro wrestling, less high spots, more psychology, building to a crescendo, telling a story, right? There is certainly a place for that. Personally, I've been watching pro wrestling for over 20 years. Because of the wrestling that I watched when I grew up, I prefer the old school psychology, telling a story, less high spots unless they mean something, less dramatic near falls unless they mean something, less kicking out people's finishes. I'm old school like that. I understand though that people that have been watching pro wrestling only a couple of years, or maybe they only started watching pro wrestling when they watched AEW, they like the high flying, they like the false finishes, they like the choreographed stuff. I get that, and it does have a place in modern pro wrestling, like every style of pro wrestling does. Nevertheless, I think because of the modern style of pro wrestling, because of the modern style of tag team wrestling, some people perceive people like FTR to be slow or boring or whatever It just isn't the case. It just isn't the case. If you're someone that does love old school pro wrestling, if you're someone that does love psychology, the nuances, holding the tank rope, old school tag team wrestling, cutting off the ring, psychology, telling stories through movesets and facial reactions and all that kind of stuff, then you know how good FTR are. And they are just fantastic. And the North are very good as well with that kind of stuff. They're not high flying, they're not flashy, they are tag team wrestling, psychology personified. That's what would make this match so good. My only concern would be probably is that you might have some people expecting to see the flips and all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't see that and they might go, oh, it's boring. He didn't have all this, he didn't have that. But I think from the pro wrestling purists, this match would be just stellar. It would be absolutely stellar. It would be absolutely phenomenal to see, and I would love to see it. So I think out of all the matches that we could possibly see when it comes to AEW and Impact, this one is actually a massive possibility. Some matches we've said today might not happen, but this one I think is super realistic. I think it's super realistic and is absolutely a possibility, and it could happen in the future. And fingers crossed it does, because it would be probably the match I'd be most excited to see. Just as I mentioned, I'm a purist. I love old school pro wrestling. I love psychology in pro wrestling, and this would just be something so special. So hopefully we do see it. And finally, what match could we see? Chris Jericho versus Chris Bay. Now, some people might raise their eyebrows at this one and say, I don't know about that. There are several reasons why I put this one on here, and if we have missed certain matches off, certain combinations of matches off, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I will do another video probably, because there are so many combinations of matches. The rosters for especially AEW, but Impact as well, is so deep, you could do a variety of matches, and there are some big names obviously we've missed out here. So why Chris Jericho and Chris Bay? Well, let's start off with Chris Jericho first. Chris Jericho, if it's an AEW card, Chris Jericho can't be left off. He just can't be left off. He is Chris Jericho. He's the highest paid guy in AEW. He is arguably the most recognizable name and star in AEW. Even at the age of 50 years old, AEW would not be as legitimately a top tier promotion today if it wasn't for Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho, when he signed with AEW, he legitimized AEW. He has to be on an AEW card, whatever form it is. Chris Jericho has to be involved. We've got to this point now when it comes to Chris Jericho, I think, that he, as I mentioned, he's 50 years old. He was the world champion, the first world champion in AEW. That was the right call as well. Legitimizing AEW, making AEW seem like a credible top company. It was the right thing to do. At this point, as 50 years old, Jericho's all about making people now. Yes, that involves him winning matches, but it's also about him making stars, making names. That's why we've seen him feud with Orange Cassidy. That's why we've seen him have matches with Darby Allin, Scorpio Sky, other names as well. You know, that's why we've seen that happen. That's why he's feuding with MJF. That was the name I was looking for. That's why he's feuding with MJF right now. I know MJF is part of the Inner Circle. It's going to become, we're going to have more Jericho and MJF matches in the future. Why? Because Chris Jericho wants to make people. He wants to create new stars for AEW. That's what Jericho's role is right now. It's to give the Jericho rub, have a little bit of that Jericho Stardust and Goldust, and put it on a superstar and turn him into a superstar. That's the whole point of Jericho in AEW right now. That's why he's got people like Sammy Guevara in the Inner Circle, because eventually Guevara and Chris Jericho will face off in a feud. It's all to make people. It's all to make new stars. So why would you have Chris Jericho facing Chris Bay? Well, I think if you look at the Impact Wrestling roster right now, there are a ton, quite frankly, of young stars with a ton of potential that Chris Jericho can face off. I actually considered having Chris Jericho face off against Ethan Page or someone like that. There is a ton of people Jericho could face off with. I chose Chris Bay because I think Chris Bay does have a plethora of potential. He is still incredibly young, and there is such a huge upside to Chris Bay. So much so, he's competing for the World Championship at Final Resolution next Saturday. He's in a World Championship match in Impact because Impact see the potential that Chris Bay has. He really does have it all. He has the looks, he has the athleticism, he has the ability to go in the ring, he does have that charisma, that swagger. He probably does need to improve on his promos, but he's still a very young guy. He's still developing his pro wrestling character. If you put him in the ring with Chris Jericho, just being in the ring with Jericho itself, that is invaluable to the reputation and credibility of someone like Chris Bay. but also just the ability to learn, the ability to have that classic match. And you also have to remember as well, Jericho is 50. He can't go as he used to go in the ring. For a guy of 50, he is still unbelievable in the ring, honestly. Most people at the age of 50, I wish I was as good in the ring as Chris Jericho is at 50. I would never ever be as good as Chris Jericho, by the way. But Chris Jericho does also, this is why it helps with him working with younger talent, need that guy who can take bumps for him, work around him, up the pace when needed, and make Jericho look good. And that also is where Chris Bay thrives. He is a former X Division champion. He's only been with Impact, I think, less than a year, or maybe a year at this point, and he is still... the growth from then to now is unbelievable. And just think again what a feud with Chris Jericho could do. Jericho would be all for this. You know Jericho would be all for this. Chris Jericho would love to face off with someone like Chris Bay. Chris Jericho loves to see up-and-coming talent, young talent with a ton of potential, and have a hand in their development. He wants to give back to pro wrestling right now. He wants to give back to pro wrestling, whether that's in AEW or even helping out an Impact Wrestling wrestler. He would love to face off against someone like Chris Bay that potentially could sign with AEW in the future and be a world champion. Anything's possible. So you know for a fact Chris Jericho would be all over this kind of match. He would want to... Chris Jericho, he's like any... He's a music guy, right? He's a rock star. He's a leader of a band. He wants to see the next big thing. He wants to face off against the next big thing. He wants to uncover the next big thing. He wants to create stars. Having a match against Chris Bay, he could create a new star like that, and Chris Bay is certainly up to the challenge. So I think Jericho versus Chris Bay would be something fascinating to watch, be a fantastic match nevertheless, and also it would have the ability for Jericho to make a star. And that's exactly what Jericho wants to do in the twilight of his career. So what did you think about those matches? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, along with the matches you would like to see or matches you would like me to break down in a future video. Again, we will be doing this again in a future video. There are so many potential matches between Impact and AEW that we could see with this working relationship. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, chat about AEW, Impact, WWE, all things pro wrestling really on the channel. All opinions are welcome. Just let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. If you're excited about this Impact and AEW partnership, smash a like on the like button. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.